Yo, welcome to another horrid LARPing competition. Today we're gonna be looking at this pop psychology channel called Psych2Go. They make videos on like psychology, and it looks like they really like our boy, our buddy Sigmund Freud, because they have a whole Alexandria library. I'm talking like thousands of videos. Okay, maybe not thousands, maybe just like a few hundred, but a lot of videos on like sexual psychology and masturbation. This is something the Big E would really be proud of, but like that's not what we're focusing on today. Today we're focusing on this particular video that they made about logic. As you guys know, I'm a very big fan of logic, right? I love looking at logical arguments, pointing out fallacies, and analytical stuff, things like that. And like I see something like this, and it's kind of like shocking, it's surprising because like as far as I know, I'm not depressed, and I'm pretty logical, I love logic. So let's see, what claims they make. It's see if they're actually true, or if they're just larping. It's just become another larping war.
With a level of sober clarity that can be startling. So let's dive deeper and understand why. Depression as reality filtering. One of the most well-known ideas in psychology is the depressive realism hypothesis. First proposed in 1988, this theory suggests that people with mild to moderate depression sometimes see reality more accurately than those without depression. To test this, they conducted an experiment and asked participants to judge how much control they have over a light bulb turning on. Non-depressed participants tended to overestimate their influence, believing their button presses were making the light appear when in reality it was random. Depressed participants, however, were far more accurate. They didn't assume control where there was none. While further evidence has been mixed and inconclusive, there's certainly an argument to be made that while most people lean towards optimism or self-service.
All right, so their first claim is that like depressed minds see the world more clearly and more analytically. Now, what they're using to back this up is called the depressive realism hypothesis. Now, notice the key word. They're using the word hypothesis, which means that it's a scientific theory. Everybody knows this, okay? So it's not a proven fact. The evidence that they have is some study done in 1998 where they conducted, where participants judged their control over randomly operating a light, and like non-depressed individuals tended to overestimate their influence, while the depressed participants judge their lack of control more like accurately. So like that might seem convincing. That experiment might seem like it reveals something, but it's actually really inconsistent. But again, this is a methodological issue. I don't think I pronounced that right, but I think you guys know what I'm saying. And like, having unclear standards of reality and self-reporting diagnosis and poor real-world ability, they further weaken this theory, because according to these clinical studies right here, let's see, more MT Fresco DM 2007. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce any of this, but these studies concluded that depressive realism is limited, inconsistent, and like task specific, not global accuracy. Another, study done by Dobson in France French. What the hell is this name, bro? In 1989, in under the Canadian Journal of Behavioral Science, also concluded that depressed individuals are often equally or less accurate in real world judgments. So these are like many other things that these other clinical studies also prove that this study is largely inconsistent and inaccurate, and this is obviously an hypothesis. I don't know why they're using hypothesis as like a fact. That's like it's kind of like intellectually dishonest. All right, so I'm going to be using a syllogism right here because this is logic. So let's use the tool that they're saying they're accusing us of depression against them, okay? So logic requires accurate perceptions across contexts, right? Depressive realism is limited to narrow experimental tasks. So that's um, premise two. Premise three, depressed individuals often generalize lack of control where control exists. Therefore, depressive realism cannot justify the claim of superior logic, all right? So this is basically my argument.
Loss. Depression is often triggered by experiences of loss, relationships, opportunities, health, or meaning. When your world has shifted in painful ways, the brain adjusts by trying to make sense of it, and logic becomes a survival tool. Think about grief. It forces us to confront what really matters, but it also disrupts cognition. Studies show it can impair focus, memory, and decision-making, and it's common to bargain or shoulder irrational guilt. Yet paradoxically, this same process can sharpen logic. Stripped of optimism or distraction, the mind reduces life to bare.
All right, so their second claim to prove that logic is depression or whatever, they say that logic is a consequence of loss and thus is used as a survival tool. So this again, let me go to the syllogism just to like examine this argument. All right, let's examine this in the syllogism stuff. So premise one. Loss causes people to confront reality. Premise two, when one confronts reality, they stick to basic essentials. So basic essentials would be like logic and survival and all that type of stuff. That's their claim. Premise three, logic is a basic essential. Well, I said that already, but yeah. Conclusion. Thus, logical people are depressed because they have suffered loss. But here's the problem. This falls into a false cause, non sequitur, and hasty generalization fallacy. Right? Just because someone experienced loss and has to go stick to their basic essentials does not follow that logical people are depressed, right? That just does not follow. That does not make any sense. Okay, that is again a non sequitur argument, and it's also a false cause or post hoc fallacy, as other people call it. So this is a false cause, and as well as a hasty generalization. I feel like anybody with half a brain can understand that. So let me just like add some more stuff. So this again is a hypothesis. They keep on using hypotheses as like established fact when it's not. All right. So they say that this is like an evolutionary consequence of our brain wanting to problem solve, but they don't add any nuance, which I will. So a review on the Journal of Affective Disorders in 2004 argues that that depression does not meet the four core criteria of biological adaptation, like showing clear fitness advantages and consistent triggers. Depression doesn't clearly improve evolutionary fitness in this strict sense. So severe depression like impairs functioning, social bonds, reproduction, and many evolutionary claims. So this is like a very hard to test, and this is like very speculative, you know. Uh, so this is a very weak claim. Well, falling as a post hoc and oversimplification as well as a naturalistic fallacy. Oh my god, I genuinely butchered that. But what I meant is post hoc, oversimplification, and naturalistic fallacy. All right, so they're using anecdotal evidence from people who are suffering from depression being analytical. That doesn't really prove anything. So again, this again has been refuted. By the way, I forgot to put this. So I'm just like interjecting right now after I'm done recording. But this is another syllogism that I had that I wanted to show you guys. So again, one of their claims is that depression strips illusion. So therefore, you see the world more clearly. And part two, seeing reality clearly, you notice the world is harsh and it leads to more depression. So in conclusion is that depression makes you logical. The problem with this is a circular argument. What it's trying to like prove is that just because someone feels more sober or detached while depressed doesn't automatically mean they're thinking more logically, more rational in the rigorous sense, right? Logic is like a formal method of reasoning, right? So clarity of perception isn't the same as valid reasoning. So essentially, they're just like begging the question. Okay, it's like a circular argument. And so, like again, like I mentioned this before, Aristotle, founder of logic and ethics, right? So if he noticed like logic in the first place, according to their own, their own definition of this, that Aristotle would be depressed. But we don't know that, I guess for sure. But based off his work, like the Nicomachean Ethics, I don't think he was depressed because he argued that the best life was to live, a life of virtue, and the highest goal in life was like eudaimonia, which is translated to perpetual happiness. So I don't think that logic correlates to depression, guys.
Neurology of emotion versus reason. On the neurological level, depression changes how the brain processes information. The brain's reward system, centered on dopamine pathways, often becomes less responsive. Things that once brought joy feel flat. Without the pull of reward, the brain isn't swayed as much by rose-colored thinking. Some studies also suggest depressed people showed increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, reasoning, and evaluating consequences. The result? A colder, less emotionally biased approach to decisions. Of course, this doesn't always feel like a gift. The same analytic style that spots logical inconsistencies also
Alright, so their third claim is that depression causes the brain to change, which is true, but they claim that depression may promote cold, logical thinking, but at the cost of heightened awareness of life's unfairness. Oh my god, this sounds like I don't even know, bro. But because it alters the brain's function by like reducing the reward system and responsiveness, like dopamine and things like that, making previously enjoyable activities feel flat, um, limiting optimistic like biases. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex activity may increase, enhancing, uh, planning, reasoning with evaluation. This can lead to a more analytical, less emotionally based perspective, but also makes like negative aspects of life feel painfully clear. However, I've mentioned this before. The evidence against this claim, so I'm not going to repeat myself, guys. Like again, they like claim that they may point out life's unfairness because they're too simply analytical. Another false cause. This is just another false cause, an argument, and like oversimplified. They just brutally oversimplified this, guys. I already refuted this. What am I doing, bro?
clarity. But it does explain why many people in depression find themselves drawn to philosophy, problem solving, or brutally honest self reflection. Philosophy, Stoicism, and the depressed mind. History is full of philosophies that sound a lot like the thoughts of someone in depression. Stoic philosophers, for
Scientists say that humans evolved from monkeys. Is it possible you evolved from some sort of boar?
example, taught people to detach from emotions, face hard truths, and prepare for the worst. Existentialists like Kierkegaard and Sartre wrote about despair as an unavoidable condition of human existence. For someone who's depressed, these ideas often feel less like abstract theories and more like lived experience, putting words to what they already feel. When optimism has been stripped away, when joy is no longer guaranteed, philosophies built on logic, acceptance, and meaning making over blind hope can feel more honest than simple positive thinking. For many, it's comforting to hear the Stoic reminder that pain is part of life, or the existentialist claim that meaning must be created, not found.
Okay, this is their final claim that they have. I have it wrong as a number. I put two claim threes, but this is their fourth claim. But all right. So this is juicy stuff, guys. They start dissing philosophy. All right, I ain't gonna let that slide, bro. I ain't letting that slide. So we're gonna be like, we're gonna refute them. All right. So they claim that depression can push people towards philosophy. All right, I guess, bro. I guess problem solving and self reflection, because stripped of optimism, they resonate with traditions like Stoicism or existentialism that confront life's harsh realities. Sounds so corny, bro. Who even wrote the script? This depressed. Oh my god, I can't speak. This depressive clarity allows for rational and analytical thinking and recognition of life's unfairness. Oh my god, this is like a horrible argument, bro. Like, okay, so like they mentioned Stoic philosophers. I love Stoicism. You know, I read the books and everything. So, but they didn't even name a single one. They named some other ones, which were Soren Kierkegaard and Sartre, which I don't know too much about. But they didn't name a single one of the Stoic philosophers. Neither did they actually like talk about their ideas. All right. So, Stoicism teaches to be detached from emotion, face hardships, and be ready for the worst. This is what they claim, right? This is a very common misconception of the Stoic thought. Classic Stoic philosophers like Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius did not teach emotional suppression or clinical pessimism. Instead, it teaches discernment of what is within our control and focuses on action and judgment and proper regulation of emotions. The goal is not detachment for its own sake, but to prevent destructive passions from clouding our judgment. Stoics value reason and harmony with virtue, not cold nihilistic analysis. So that's like the difference. They also preach resilience, not despair. Stoicism encourages facing difficulties with wisdom, but it's about active engagement and not passive paralysis or embracing suffering in the end. Another thing that I want to point is that a lot of psychology, a lot of the way that they treat people in psychology is influenced by a lot of stoicism, like DBT, CBT, all that type of stuff. I'm gonna put like maybe like something on screen right now to like prove this, but a lot of stoicism has influence in the exact field that they claim to be an expertise in. In my opinion, I think they're just LARPing. But if they are real like psychologists, then they know that a lot of the you know acceptance therapies and things like that are based off of stoic practices. So they're kind of being hypocrites here, if I'm not gonna lie. Then they also mentioned uh, existentialists, which I talked about, and they mentioned Soren Kierkegaard and Sartre. Uh, so Sartre's story was that his philosophy was about how he overcame his depression, and Sartre, again, I think it's the same thing. And also Nietzsche, although I'm not really a big fan of Nietzsche was also not depressed. Nietzsche also, um, he has this whole idea of the Ubermensch coming, and right now the main issue that I'm saying that like they're saying that depression causes logic, and people who are depressed are drawn to philosophy. By this reasoning, all deeply logical religious scholars, like for example Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, Saint Thomas Aquinas, would automatically be quote unquote depressed because they applied logic to life and religion. That's a very absurd claim. Logic doesn't equal depression. Aristotle, who is the founder of logic, linked virtue to happiness. And showing logic without ethical or emotional balance isn't true reason. So, that's basically the claim. So, in conclusion, Psych2Go repeatedly confuses psychological state with epistemic authority. They keep doing post hoc reasoning. Being depressed does not grant access to the truth. Being optimistic does not invalidate reason. Logic is a method, not a mood. If depression produced logic, then most logical people would be the most depressed. Happiness would correlate with irrationality. Neither is empirically true. philosophically or any other way. So again, back if you look at Aristotle, he believed that sound reasoning is flourish. Sound reason flourishes in balance, not in despair. Right. So, you know, they got refuted. Anyways, I'm making this video mostly because I commented on this video that they made and like they didn't respond. They just completely ignored me, which is just because here's my argument that I put over here on screen. So yeah, and then like half of the other comments in this video are just people larping and thinking that just because they use like basic syllogism in their life or something that they're like depressed. They don't even know anything about logic. But anyways, my name is Adi and this is Rational Scientist. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and see you next time.